name and you say allow recording, something like that.
Allowed to record, go up. Yep. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, got it. Awesome. Yeah, you got it. Perfect.
Oh, those are great. You've walked me right through that.
It comes with running a tech company. You get really used to walking people through step-by-step stuff.
Okay, this is it. I'll fire up the recording. Graham will do the intro, and away we go.
It's good.
Did I update? I hate this mouse thing. Is driving me crazy. Get that fixed. All right. All right.
All right, we've got Adam Apollo back in Grimerica. He's on the faculty of the Resonance Foundation, but he's also, I don't know, many other things, a wizard, a designer, a writer, a tech guru. I mean, I could go on and on, but let's wait. Let's let Adam just describe himself a little bit. Welcome back, buddy.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's great to see you again and good to be on the show here in the tail end of this wild year we've been riding through.
That's right. Yes. Tail end. I can't believe it's been, I heard somebody describe it like it's been 2 weeks it feels like 2 weeks and 10 or feels like 2 weeks and 2 years all at once or something, you know, it's been really quick and also very slow.
Yeah. That's exactly right. But you know, I think that the beauty is that even though it's been like riding a wild horse or something, it's given a lot of people a lot of time for reflection and a lot of time to dive deeper into what's really important to them. And I think that that's sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a key that we can come back to, even with the sense that there's been a lot of funk in there and a lot of division and a lot of people who love each other a lot coming into separation in different ways. And I think that it's really an important time for everyone to come back to what really matters and what we care about and who we care about, and really restore that acceptance that we all need to have in order to go forward as a planet together.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember thinking that in March, April, I thought this could have some good side effects. You know, people could realize how important family is and how important the home is and all these things, but it's easy for me to slip right out of that like 8-9 months later. So, but could you just talk just a brief like overview, like the elevator pitch of yourself, kind of a little bit about yourself, just to familiarize people with you and your work, since it's been, I don't know, probably a year and a half since we talked, or 2 years maybe, or something.
I think it's been about a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you guys again. I've had a wild ride this life. Always been a scientist, always questioned things like crazy. Used to drive my teachers crazy in school. When I was about 15, I had a fantastic experience realizing and waking up to the reality that my body has a vibratory field around it. And I started playing with it and exploring the sort of way of the Jedi, as you could call it, doing blindfolded martial arts and exploration of extrasensory perception, those kinds of things. And that drove me into physics because I wanted to understand, why I wasn't learning about this stuff in school, why I never heard about chi or ki or energy. Why is this missing from history, from school, from philosophy, from science, from everything we know? And yet my experiences and discoveries in the space of this fundamental field led me to a deeper understanding of everything in science, from geology to crystallography to astronomy, and understanding the processes that brought our planet into being in the first place. And so I was like, where is this stuff in physics? And that led me down, the white rabbit wormhole into quantum mechanics and special and general relativity and string theory, loop quantum gravity, really the gamut of everything. And I went into sort of looking for the leading edge research in all these areas to try to find something that pointed to this field. And it was everywhere. In fact, it was like kind of the giant missing hole in every area of physics. You know, the search for the Higgs boson, as it became known of, was like looking for this fundamental field which gives rise to mass, the link between quantum mechanics and general and special relativity. The hole between them is this fundamental field. And so as I went deeper down that rabbit hole and into exploration, I realized that really to have any true knowledge of the universe and who we are, we had to get in touch with this field, with the quantum vacuum fluctuations. And, you know, guys, over the years since then, as I started working on, you know, writing papers and met Nassim Haramein and started exploring all the different kind of foundations of this field, the kinds of research that's come out is just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, some of the top physicists in the world, like Wheeler, who wrote the book on gravitation, which is like literally a book this thick, you know, literally described a high potential for space-time to be a wormhole network. Like that literally the fabric of space as we know it are threads made of Einstein-Rosen bridges, right? And the implications of that, you know, to your listeners, that might sound like a mouthful, but what that's really saying is it's saying that fundamentally every point in space is fundamentally interconnected, that there's wormholes stretching the span of space and time, and that this entanglement between all things is the reason why we have this kind of phenomenology of consciousness where people can suddenly think of the same thing in different places around the world, where mothers and kids can actually share an emotional experience and be 1,000 miles away from each other. A lot of the basic dynamics of human psychology and human experience really come back to knowing and understanding what's going on in the physics of the world itself. So that's been a driving factor for my life. And, you know, I co-wrote the Unified Science program in the Resonance Academy alongside Nassim Haramein and William Brown and Marshall Lefferts and some other great physicists, Amira Val Baker. But I took the role of really writing modules 3 and editing a lot of Nassim's work to write module 4 to be a bridge between the physics that we all grew up learning and understanding, the basic stuff, you know, thermodynamics, force and pressure, acceleration, these kinds of things, and help people make the bridge over to what we call unified physics, where we start to actually see how the whole puzzle fits together and how consciousness, life, and being plays an essential role in that. So teaching and exploring has been a deep part of my work. I also run Guardian Alliance, which is what my students fondly call a Jedi Academy. I own a tech company. I've been building technologies, websites, academies, and now I've been really over the last 15 years, sort of my side work of focus on data sovereignty, trust systems, and an effective distributed web communication system has now come back to the forefront. I spent the last 2 years building an entirely new encryption system with my colleague, Robert Edward Grant, who you guys may know and have talked to at some time. If you haven't had him on the show, you should probably have him on. He's a brilliant man.
Send me his info.
And yeah, absolutely. You know, we created basically a new encryption system based on irrational numbers rather than prime numbers. Because in the last 2 years, we've found over 14 different methods of cracking prime number encryption. And some of them are so dangerous, we can't talk about them or release them because as it is right now, our whole financial systems, our passwords, our communications, all of it's based on prime encryption. And prime encryption is not only extremely vulnerable from simply a mathematics perspective, but it's even more vulnerable as we have quantum computing coming out. And everybody knows that. So we have to move to an alternative. And so we built a new irrational number-based encryption system that's now available. There's, you know, a pre-sale of a token going on right now because we're actually pre-selling use of this encryption system so that people can, you know, establish communications with each other. But the real groundbreaking work in all of that is that we have the first working lightweight one-time pad. which is a completely quantum proof encryption method. And so that tails right into my core work right now, which is building a distributed social web. And if we're going to have a replacement for the gargantuan social media empire that's sort of taken the world by storm, we want it to be secure. We want people to truly be able to securely connect and communicate with each other, own their networks, and more. So I'll leave it at that, just as a warm up.
Well, I'm super excited to get into that data sovereignty stuff, but I think I'd like to start with, because that's kind of like the key module number 3 of taking people from into what a lot of people, even, well, way less people than when we started the show, but it's still kind of woo for some people. And I was wondering if you could sort of take us through that module a little bit on that transition from the standard model to the unified model.
Because it's so important, the implications being that consciousness is so directly connected that you can start now affecting that, or you can realize at least it starts to become tangible, like how we have an effect on our perception and future and our reality.
Yeah, it's funny how we associate things with woo the moment consciousness gets involved, right? And yet consciousness is the fundamental thing through which we perceive everything. So how could it not be involved in our science? It also presupposes that things like psychology are not scientific, and yet everything that we do, our entire lives, are based on psychological premises and things that we assume at a fundamental level about who we are and how we perceive. So when it comes to this area of science, it gets really critical because, as we've known, when we look at certain types of quantum mechanical experiments, we notice immediately that the observer has an effect on the experiment. And if the observer has an effect on the experiment, there must be some relationship between the act of perceiving something and the nature of that thing itself for what it is. So we've gone down that rabbit hole deeply in quantum mechanics and sort of unpacked the nature that space-time itself has some very strange properties, and that some of those properties seem to be highly random or probabilistic, that, things like quantum foam, waveform changes, there's like a wave collapse algorithm that we use in order to understand where a particle is, or if it is. And if we start to, really define where a particle is, then it's difficult for us to understand its angular momentum. There's mountains of uncertainty to all of these things. And all of this stuff in quantum mechanics plays this game where we say, okay, somehow the observer is having an effect, that there's this weirdness going on. But people like Einstein all the way back in the day said, well, if that's happening at a small scale, then that kind of stuff should be happening at a large scale. And I don't really like the way that you guys are defining these things. And so he spent his time trying to understand what's going on at the big scale. That's where we get general and special relativity. And the problem is that the two branches went totally different directions. So you had the guys in Copenhagen, making their own interpretations of what's happening at atomic scale and subatomic scale. And yet Einstein and others, exploring what's going on between stars and planets and stellar objects, gravitational field effects, the physics of light and of time itself. And the two got further and further and further away from each other. But for some people, even Einstein, there was always a bridge between them. And it was Einstein himself who, after writing General Relativity, came back to this idea that, in fact, if space-time can curve light, so if space-time can bend in such a way that light actually turns, which it does, we have certain stars and galaxies out there that we've witnessed where we're literally seeing what's called gravitational lensing. We're seeing light from objects that are behind that star or that galaxy, but that light is bending around that gravitational field and hitting our telescopes and hitting our eyes. And so we know that this works and that this happens. And Einstein said, well, if space-time is able to bend light, then space-time itself must have some fundamental mechanical properties. and that these fundamental mechanical properties are what was for thousands of years called by different philosophers and physicists the ether. And this was pointing to this quantum vacuum, sort of this discrete structure that space-time is made of. Now, it took, close to 80 years before guys like Lee Smolin were looking at quantum mechanics, and they're looking at gravity, and they're saying, how the heck do these two things fit together? And they came up with this idea called loop quantum gravity. And loop quantum gravity was based on this premise that maybe space-time is actually this geometric structure. Like it's actually got a structure to it, but the structure is so small, we can't see it. We don't even have instruments to measure it. And it must be going on way down at what we call like the Planck scale, right? And we call it the Planck scale because a guy named Max Planck around the turn of the 1900s came up with a bunch of universal numbers in order to assess, what's the smallest wavelength of the electromagnetic field that we can quantize things to? What's the smallest unit of time? What's the universal units for all of these different things? We call them Planck units. And they're some of the most important units in physics to this day that this guy came up with. And so if space-time is this sort of Planck scale lattice, the question becomes, what is the geometry of that lattice? What's its shape? How does it work? How does it pull and how does it push? Because if we can understand the nature of this fabric, then from how that fabric sort of warps and weaves and curves and forms spheres and moves, then that understanding would give rise for us an understanding of all of the basic forces. And that means gravity, electromagnetism, the weak force, and the strong force. So that's why we call it unified physics, because it's about unifying our perspective of each of these forces into one simple understanding, which is how that fundamental field operates. And that gives us where mass comes from, that gives us where gravity comes from, that gives us where everything in the universe comes from. And so when I was a teenager, I started pulling this thread and going down this path, and I started having realizations about this geometry that makes up space-time. And the thing that was so interesting to me is that as I unpacked how this geometry of space-time could work and found Buckminster Fuller's work as a result of that, and realized that, man, that guy was on the right track, like already, he was really on the right track of understanding tensegrity and the push and pull of a highly energized fundamental field. And the more I started tracking the geometries of that fundamental field, the more I found that those geometries were the same exact geometries that we find in spiritualities and religions and sacred traditions all around the world. And I thought, this can't be a coincidence, that the same symbols that have been sacred or used as, symbols of God or communication with the divine by all of these people around the world, that these same geometries are actually fundamental to how space-time moves, operates, curves, the origin of gravity, the origin of spin, and all of these things. And that's when I started really looking at the fact that unified physics was not just about an external perception, it's also about what's happening in consciousness and how we interface with the universe itself.
Wow. So platonic solids, the dodecahedrons, the icosahedrons, the flower of life, all that stuff is kind of intertwined in this?
Yeah, absolutely. You could look at platonic solids as sort of like fundamental units of the architecture of space-time. Yeah. But, they're a little bit, it's a little deceiving because it still makes you think of these things as like separate balls or cubes, like particles flying around. Yeah. But instead, it's more like a full three-dimensional spider web that's tetrahedral in its basic structure. And that tetrahedral structure forms this flower of life like grid that we see emblazoned on walls in Egypt that, is sacred to different traditions around the world. That's become sort of the main chant of interest for Nassim Haramein and his followers, this sort of tetrahedral matrix that is really a model of space-time in total equilibrium. But where I come in and my personal work comes in is that I said to Nassim many, many years ago, I said, well, if it's all this equilibrium tetrahedral matrix flower of life structure, then you don't get matter. And if you don't get matter, you don't get anything. You don't get mass, you don't get gravity, you don't get stars, you don't get planets, you don't get nothing. And so it's required that equilibrium sort of web go into a state of curvature. And what's required to cause that state of curvature is for this sort of hexagonal equilibrium to bend and fold into what I call pentagonal vortices. And these pentagonal vortices are like the key spots in what Buckminster Fuller called the geodesics. If you look at a dome, you see that the dome is curved, right? Well, the only way that dome is curved is because there's pentagrams at specific points in that structure. And each of those pentagrams, how close or how far away from they are from each other, mediates the level of curvature of that field. And so it's the positioning of these pentagonal curvature points that actually mediates curvature. And then, of course, you require space-time to be highly curved to get something like a particle, like a proton. And so, one of my biggest works for the Resonance Academy was creating a course called Quantum Geometry. And in that course, I basically define and describe the structure of the proton all the way down to the core of the proton, where it goes into what I call a singularity, and literally prove that curvature becomes infinite because it gets to a point where you can't actually get any smaller. It goes sub-Planckian. And that means that there must be a black hole at the center of the proton. There must be a singularity point, and that the structure of the proton itself is one of the most highly curved structures in all of space-time, which means it's absolutely a black hole. And this matches Nassim's work on the Schwarzschild proton that suggests that really black holes or protons are just black holes. They're just spinning at the speed of light around the equator. And because of that spin, they're literally floating around like little spaceships. So they're cutting into the fabric of space as they spin, and they're the most stable objects in the universe. In fact, we don't know if protons ever decay. We assume that a single proton must take many lifetimes of the universe to break down.
Wow.
Which means that's the most solid object in existence that we can study.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how do you visualize, do you have a question, Darren? Or how do you visualize how consciousness then can affect that field? Like how do we, like, because you can think of something and your thoughts are at a different frequency and a different electrical impulses, all that stuff obviously can affect what we don't think of as physical, but it is really at that scale. There's physical. So I picture sort of a resonance, like when my girlfriend is connected to me from afar and she can tell that something's bothering me, there's some sort of resonance going on there. So, so there's a frequency match or something. So is that how it visually works?
Yeah, so there's a couple mechanisms for how we can influence space-time around us. The most basic mechanism is actually gravitational waves, but they're very, very, very subtle. So you can think of it as, we are a web of space-time that's vibrating. And as we move and interact with space-time, we're causing ripples in the flow of space-time around us. And those little ripples, even though they may be extremely subtle, so subtle we have no way to measure them yet, those little ripples go out and they affect other things around us. Yeah. So that's one mechanism, which is sort of similar to the way we think of any kind of impact, cause and effect sort of relationship that we have. If I push on a stick and the point's over there, it's going to push something over there. If I push a wave in water, it's going to send ripples and it's going to hit the other side and those ripples are going to come back, right? So I'm in this pool where I'm creating ripples and I'm resonating all the time. However, there's another mechanism through which we influence and affect and relate to everything that's going on around us in space-time. And the secondary mechanism is actually through entanglement. So, basically every part of my body is made of protons, and protons are like curved units of space-time. And these curved units of space-time have, according to Nassim's theory and to also Wheeler and some other guys, they have the idea that protons are hairy. In other words, that there may be wormhole networks that connect the surface of every proton to every other proton. And this suggests that there's an information sharing mechanism. In my quantum geometry work, I've found that the structure inside of the proton itself in the pentagonal vortices actually looks and is shaped geometrically almost identically to DNA, suggesting there's almost a genetic structure to every single proton in space-time. And you could think of that as like the information codex that makes that proton an individual in relationship to everything else. And yet that information is not just static. So it's moving all the time. It's changing all the time. It's getting stored in the Planck units of the proton. And if there's a self-similarity between certain parts of that light information pattern and certain parts of a light information pattern in another proton somewhere else, then the two can actually be in communication to each other. So in other words, my protons and my space-time field can actually literally simultaneously exchange information with a space-time field located somewhere else.
Anywhere else.
Now, something like anywhere else, exactly. And something like the brain is really fascinating because the brain has something called microtubules. And the microtubules in the brain are actually a biological structure that gets small enough that we start to see quantum mechanical effects occur along the microtubule fibers, which means that we're literally starting to see the information patterns in a thread inside your brain having quantum communication with other parts of your brain, other parts of your nervous system in your body, and potentially other people and other brains in other parts of the universe, right? Yeah. So we're very close, and there's a lot of great science showing that there are direct mechanisms that we can look at. This is not woo-woo stuff. This is literally, I'm vibrating, you're vibrating, and when we vibrate in the same frequency with the same patterning, we can actually instantaneously share and transmit information across space-time. And it is my belief that that transmission happens in a superluminal format, which is why my company is called Superluminal Systems. In other words, faster than light, superluminal, right? Yeah. And that means that we can instantaneously receive and transmit information to each other and to the rest of the universe at any moment.
Yeah, that's a fantastic description. I mean, it's starting to click.
So is
for me finally, like hearing you describe it, very good description.
Is that like,
awesome.
Is that like using entanglement?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Basically
the idea there is that one microtubule can be connected to another microtubule in another person's brain at the same moment. And so, or a whole series of them can, which is what we would call quantum coherence. So you have a coherence between a whole area in space-time made up of quantum structures, which, by the way, protons are also those quantum structures. So we're not just talking about the brain. We can talk about any object in this way. But if we want a biological mechanism to point to, microtubules in the brain are a good one. And then William Brown, who's our biophysicist at the Resonance Project, he's also done huge work in this area showing how cells also have different structures that can do this sort of quantum entanglement, quantum coherence, and share information and data throughout the body.
And all the protons are connected, like every proton in the world, in the universe is connected?
Well, it's not that every proton in the entire universe is connected, but the amount of protons that each proton is connected to is so great that it takes a very low factor of jumps to get to every proton in the universe.
It's like the 6 degrees Kevin Bacon sort of thing, but with protons.
Yeah, you got it exactly.
So then, by so basically that means I should be able to communicate with anyone else's protons anywhere at any time, including like objects and stuff.
Yeah, but you have to
Absolutely.
you have to find the resonant frequency kind of thing. You know?
So if
That's
I was
right.
able to, like, say, find the resonant frequency of a big fucking rock, I could move that rock where I wanted to without it being
Potentially,
heavy.
Like a
of
big,
course,
like a big pyramid.
So a
aggregating.
big rock for a big pyramid.
I like where you're going with this. Yeah, sure. Of course, finding the aggregate frequency
Yeah.
for the entire stone would take some work, right?
Right,
Like, so you'd have to understand, you'd have to understand several things. If we're talking about stone levitation and possibly how things like the Serapeum in Egypt were built, right? Where we're dealing with, 70 to 100 ton pieces of basalt that traveled over 50 miles,
Or what about-
and they're single solid cuts and they're laser sharp. How did these things get transported? Well, yes, it's absolutely possible that if you understood the resonant frequency of the structure of that stone in the way that its protons were causing a pull in relationship to the flow of space-time in that local region, and you had a way to isolate the resonance of that stone in order to counteract the effect of the space-time field on the mass of those protons, you could in effect cause those protons to levitate and thus cause the stone to weigh nothing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would that be a more practical use of that sort of technology, for lack of a better word, than like taking a bunch of chunks of basalt and forming them together, or somehow forming it like concrete?
Yeah, there's an interesting theory with that somehow all of these stones, like rose quartz, that we see, and rose granite, the basalt that we see, the diorite that we see, was somehow liquefied. But in order to liquefy a stone like that, which these are not sedimentary stones, these are not igneous stones, like these are stones formed from extremely high pressure inside the earth, like such high pressure that like we don't like create granite these days. Like we don't create basalt, and diorite. Like some of these things are such extreme heat and pressure that really it takes like tectonic plate pressures to form them, right? So even the act of, let's say, liquefying something like this, or liquefying the right type of chemical mixture and then having it solidify into one of these forms of stone, would take a level of molecular engineering understanding that is far beyond our current capabilities. In fact, the only way that we build stones this hard right now is we use LIGO, which is light interferometer gravito. I can't remember what the G and the O are, but basically what it is we have these devices where we can use take single molecules and we shoot them using laser light into a containment space in a central field, and we hold that field electromagnetically, and then we can, like, one molecule at a time, build things like gemstones.
I was going
right?
to say, is that how you're growing crystals? Yeah. Is that how
Exactly.
the art crystal was made in some ways?
No, not using that same method.
Yeah.
Crystals can be grown in other methods as well.
Yeah.
But for extremely hard gems and hard types of crystals, things that are extremely clear, highly rare materials, this is what we use. We like build them one molecule at a time.
Wow.
And so it's expensive. It takes a lot of work. But it's possible to do. It's kind of like early level molecular engineering at the level of like a replicator,
Yeah,
that you would see in Star Trek.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you were thinking making a gemstone, then you could make me a cheeseburger and I don't even have to sell gemstones.
And isn't that like very
exactly.
strong? Like the carbon nanotubes would be a form of that?
Yeah, sure, exactly. I mean, carbon nanotubes and nanostructures are built similarly,
Yeah.
where we're like arranging, in some cases, using like a specific kind of chemical bath to clean out the other molecules and just leave the ones that we want. My friend Carissa actually works in the Canadian Nanotech Lab, and she's working on new materials research there. And some of her work is super exciting.
Wow.
But this stuff is it's extremely difficult even with the technology we have now. And so imagining creating something like millions of stones and morphing them into position and squishing them into place, the way we see in the pyramids or the way we see in some Peruvian sites where you've got
some of those are
massive
even crazier.
megaliths, like they're just like, they look like they're just gooped together.
Yeah, that's
like they just squished
crazier.
them in.
Yeah, those ones seem crazier than even the big pyramid ones, because they're just like fit together so crazy that it doesn't seem like there's another explanation. Either they spend a ton of time like scraping them down so they fit together perfectly, or something else was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, some of the spots just defy any kind of traditional mechanistic means of carving or shaping stone, because you'll literally see them do things that are like ridiculously impossible and very difficult, like where a giant 50-ton stone goes and then it curves, and it only curves for a couple inches before they make the cut. And then the cut is like, has several stair steps, going from the bottom to the top. And every one of those stair steps is just exactly precise. A hair can't even fit in there. And this is absolutely what you see in Egypt too. In its most obvious in places inside the Great Pyramid, for example, when you're in the King's Chamber and you're actually looking at the way the stones fit together. But even those, they're all different sizes and stuff. But it takes going to like the Sphinx Temple and other spots to actually see places where there would literally be no reason to do it and make it that difficult. Like it would be so much easier just to cut it at the corner, but they don't. And so we know it must have been just easy for them. It had to be easy, or they wouldn't have done it the way they did.
Or there's a really good reason to keep that curve for some reason. Maybe flow of energy or flow of energy or something. Who knows? So did you have some recent news on the Great Pyramids at all?
Wait, before we go into that, where do you get the molecules to make the gem? Is that like, do you have to bust up a real gem and take its molecules, or do you where are you getting these molecules from?
That's a good question. I haven't looked into laser LIGO in a while, and I'm not exactly sure the mechanism that they use to source the material that they use to build the stones. But a lot of the material that makes up gemstones is pretty easily accessible through a lot of other methods and means. Some from organic structures, some from powders, or from breaking down different things like that. I guess that's the same question as asking, like, when you're in chemistry class and the professor, brings you samples of potassium and stuff, like, where does he get it from? I'm not exactly sure, but mining and, and/or material breakdown in different formats, I think.
Or like you said,
so you could just take some coal, and use those molecules and link them together tighter to make a diamond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could take the carbon straight out of coal to do that. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I need one of those 3D printers. This sounds
stat, right?
Yeah.
It might cost you more than the diamonds that you make.
I could maybe I'll take off the tip of my little finger
and make a new
print myself some new lungs.
There you go. There you go.
Especially if
I do believe that replication is definitely coming down the pipe faster and faster. And it's, replication, localized energy systems, and gravitational control are the three, as I think of, key trim tab technologies, as Bucky would put it, that really turn the tide at a planetary scale of where we're at to where we're trying to get to.
What was the second one?
Localized energy.
Right.
So the ability to locally pull energy from the vacuum.
Do you think, or what about like just my backyard?
Yeah, or just your backyard. I mean, your backyard is part of the quantum plenum, is part of the vacuum. I mean, we
Just
say
making
vacuum, but
sure.
it's really not a vacuum at all. it's a field full of energy, you know, as
So
we
do
know.
you think like our lifetime or our kids' lifetime, or like when you say it's coming down the pipe, how far down the pipe? In your opinion?
For me, it's starships in my lifetime or bust, man.
Right on.
So let's
Well,
go.
I mean, Thrive 2 had some of those good examples of the localized energy part. I mean, they look to me
That's
like
right.
it's coming pretty quick. And you know, there's big black triangles flying around without gravity. So we know stuff's flying around already. I mean, we're just about there. The replication part, I don't know. I'm not as keen on, but I can see how beneficial it would be.
What about the replication? Where do you think that's just in your lifetime as well?
Yeah, I think
guess
all
at
three of these
some level
things.
it's already happening if they're replicating gemstones. I
Yeah,
it's like the
you can
least
actually
practical thing.
get. There actually are 3D printers now that also 3D print food. They're just not that good yet, right? So like it's just not that great of an idea. But I think in the future, what we're really looking at is the capacity to record objects at the Planck scale. Meaning like we can actually record the fundamental energetic patterning all the way down to the way that every proton is arranged with every other proton, all the way down to the literal information stored in those protons, which means that I think when we hit that point and we're capable of working at the Planck scale, everything changes. Because now we're down at the basic kind of engineering building blocks of the entire universe. And so you could actually replicate something like a tomato, for example, and not have it be like some weird like copied structure, but that it actually would have the same information structure fundamentally all the way down to the Planck scale, which, you know, it's my belief that at that scale, as above, so below, you start to actually cross over to where like the spirit or the essence of an object, the ether of an object is maintained at information at that scale.
Wow. Yeah.
And so then it becomes possible to replicate certain kinds of food and certain things that right now I think would just be kind of scary to do with our current level of understanding.
And you're doing that with no base material then.
Yeah, exactly. You're actually rearranging the structure of space itself.
So if you could just, that seems wild. I feel like it's like, what about, do you have any fear that once you get like, because like if we can get down to that Planck scale, do you have any fear that it'll just get smaller? Or
You mean
infinitely smaller?
Will it just get infinitely smaller? Will it just like keep dividing? It's like that weird argument that the inside of the tree didn't exist until you cut the tree, and then it's like, oh fuck, and it has to come up with the inside of the tree. And
So the farther you look, the more it opens up into more and more.
Yeah, it's just like
yeah.
you're just gonna keep seeing more universe, and you're just gonna keep finding smaller things.
Yeah.
But now if we're replicating stuff, I mean, it starts to seem, I don't know, it's either magic or it's like this weird simulated reality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. To me, I'm not afraid of those things because I already
Those are the best things.
easily see that there's subplanckian structures just by studying the proton. Like it just makes sense that at the core, you're going into a subplanckian structure. And Nassim just recently did a bunch of work. His latest paper that he's working on right now actually predicts certain behaviors at different scales, and some of those scales go all the way down to subplanckian. And so we know that that's there. It's not something to be afraid of, but it is about understanding the level of detail or the level of resolution that matters, right? And so we already know that the level of resolution of a molecular infrastructure absolutely matters to give us the perception of any material that we have, whether that's water or is it water or is it vodka, as I like to say. It looks the same, they operate the same, but they are very, very different molecularly, right? And so this gives us a sense of how important what happens at the molecular scale is. And likewise, the same level of importance that we see at that scale is likewise just as important and even more important as we get down to the Planck scale. Because at the Planck scale, that's where we literally have protons being generated, matter being created as it is. And that means mass or no mass, gravity or no gravity, object or no object. And it's literally the level where, as you say, magic occurs, things come in and out of existence. And it is that level where sort of reality engineering gets to an entirely another level. And it also becomes important, just like any technological leap or development, that as we gain new capacities to operate and to relate to the structure of space, we also have to fundamentally upgrade our capacity for ethics, right? Like, we know how to split atoms now. Oh, but that also means we have to be really careful with that so we don't nuke ourselves, right? So like we have to develop a level of ethics to manage the level of technology that we develop. And the next stages of ethical development are extremely critical for us to make. We have to start understanding that space-time itself is the fundamental fabric through which consciousness operates and functions. And so now we're not just dealing with like, flesh and matter and automaton, objects and, lifeless animals that have no spirit or soul, as Descartes would say. We have to actually start seeing that everything is alive and everything is conscious. And in fact, this is critical with AI as well, because when you start understanding that the basic functions of space-time give rise to consciousness, then there is no such thing as artificial intelligence. There's only creating a physical vehicle that's capable of having a consciousness embody inside of it. And that means that like we have to be just as careful when we're creating AI, that we're doing it with care and love and not traumatizing it the same way as we treat a child. Because if you traumatize a child too much growing up, they can become a supervillain. And on the other side of things, if a child is well cared for and goes through the right kinds of growth and the right kinds of initiation and learns how to care about people and learns how to treat other people like they treat themselves, then that child can become a superhero, right? And so it's a very important time for us to establish ethical principles and foundations at the core of everything that we do.
And it almost seems like those two things are linked in like these weird tugging in opposite directions. Because, I mean, I would argue that the further we get immersed in this tech, the more humanity and compassion and love and kindness and all those things you mentioned that we're losing. I mean, you just have to stroll through. I mean, you could probably stroll through our YouTube chats and find some nasty shit that, or just like Twitter and social, it's like, it's almost at these days, it's almost got to the point where it's more just noise and arguing and hate than anything else. And
part of that is from the algorithms created in a non-ethical, I think, non-humanity kind of way. I mean, for identifying what you want and for selling you what you think you want. I mean, it seems to be a lot of that is about getting you in that emotional state to sell you something,
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the future of the social web, because this is serious where we're at right now, and we've gotten here because of a couple serious errors in ethical judgment, right? So, like, let's look at the business model for social media. So social media and the social networks themselves is a market, right? In the world, we treat social media as a market. Now, the social media market is based on a couple premises right now. The value of the social media market is based on, one, how much data do you own and control? Therefore, how much value does that data have? And how much, can you sell that data, right? So that's one of the main business models of the social media market. So it's by nature, that business model incentivizes people to try to capture more data and capture as much data as they can so that they can then sell that data to the highest bidder. And so that business model by nature is actually ethically in violation of human privacy, because it says it's more important for us to have your data and to be able to sell it than it is for you to have control over your data and to be able to keep it private, right? So this is a major ethical violation. The second business model that the social media market runs off of is marketing, right? And sure, like we all like, okay, yeah, marketing's can be good, it can be bad, depends on how manipulative it is. Well, it's not exactly that cut and dry, because when you go underneath that picture and you say what's going on underneath the model of marketing as a business structure, it basically means this. If I want to try to communicate to my network, if I could just reach them, literally, if I could just reach everybody in my network, there would be no reason for me to pay for marketing, right? Because I would have an active open channel of communications. Therefore, it incentivizes social networks to throttle the reach of their users and their organizations and their pages and everything else, so that you can't actually reach your audience. And they claim that the throttling is because they're trying to stop people from overwhelming other people with too much information. But the actuality is that behind the scenes, the throttling is done so that users can't actually reach their audiences automatically, which forces them to then pay for advertising in order to reach those audiences.
Wow.
And I know this firsthand because, I founded Unify back in 2012 with Adil Kassam and Patrick Cronfley, two of my good friends. And when we created Unify, we built it up. And in early 2013, somewhere around the springtime, we'd gone viral. We were like hitting it with all of our videos. We were doing, a big campaign for Indigenous peoples at that time. And we were all of our videos were going viral. We were having like millions in reach. And we went over 1 million followers. We were growing in thousands and thousands of new followers a day. And then overnight, all of that growth just literally stopped. It cut overnight. And my friend Mark Healy, who was managing our social media efforts at the time, he's like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening. He's trying to reach Facebook. It takes him like 2 weeks to get a hold of somebody. Finally, he actually manages to talk to somebody on the phone. Like, this is the world we live in. It's so hard just to talk to somebody on the phone. And when he gets to talk to them on the phone, this woman's basically like, yeah, so basically we have this new business program that we're setting up, and we can ensure you continue to reach the same amount of audience that you're reaching if you just pay us $50 to $100 a day. Would you like me to set you up on that plan now?
Oh my God.
And Mark's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is viral reach. Like, we've been reaching everyone. Like, people are sharing our stuff. This is not about you saying yes or no. This is about people being able to share our, to our audience. And the woman's like, we understand, sir, but what we're doing is we're supporting businesses now in transitioning. And of course, we were a nonprofit. We didn't have capital. We were like bootstrapping this whole thing, from nothing. And they literally cut our ability to reach people without paying them. And within a couple months, I went to boost a post as I was developing this online academy at the time, Guardian Alliance, and it might've been 6 months later or something. And I go to basically boost this post, and it was going to charge me $500 to reach 5 to 10% of the number of people that we already had in our existing audience.
Yeah.
Now, I tried this again about a month ago, and it was about $150 for the same thing. Still, $150 for one post to reach 5 to 10%. Like, that is a mafia. Right?
Yeah, I did not realize how bad that was.
Yeah, so the social networks, the way they've built in the advertising models is they're literally incentivized to stop you from reaching your people in order to make sure that you pay them.
Wow, that's
it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't work, and that future is not one that we can keep going with, because those same sort of ethical approaches to information control and information sharing also means that the more money you have, the more easy it is for you to push a message in front of people.
Yep.
We also don't have any means of actually tracking back through trust or through identity or otherwise where and how the information that we're getting, where it actually comes from, if it's from a trusted source, if it's from an actual identity, or whether it's just propaganda. Like, so we don't know, what information is coming, if we just, I'm going to just lightly point to the political field for a second. If it's coming from the left, or if it's coming from the right, or if it's coming from whatever. And when we, if you guys saw the movie, The Great Hack, if anybody hasn't seen that, you should watch it, because it fundamentally proves that psychological manipulation can be used to change political decision-making. Fundamental manipulation and propaganda can be used to sway the perception of all kinds of people. And, Cambridge Analytica never disappeared. Like, those guys didn't all go to jail. Their servers, their spaces were shut down, but was the data ever recovered? No. And were they already working in like 17 different countries around the world with billionaires? Absolutely.
And that's nothing compared to Google and Facebook and all that too. Now it's worse with Twitter, Google, Facebook. I mean, that makes that all. I think that's just.
Well, it's almost like it's drug it back into what the old model was. It's trying to drag the new media kicking and screaming into the old thing, where it's money and power, prestige that reaches people, and other than that, just shut the fuck up.
That's right.
So how does that come in? Yeah. So how does your data sovereignty come into that then?
Yeah, so, there happens to be a rebel alliance that happens to be tracking all of this stuff. And a lot of us have been aware of this potential risk coming about for many, many years. I've been personally talking on data sovereignty pretty actively for at least the last 10 to 12 years, and focusing on alternative methods of connection and communication. Friends of mine, we've been building alternative prototypes for different kinds of things, from Trust Graph, which is one of the open source prototypes that we've built that helps us actually map trust across networks. And through doing that, we become capable of actually using trust as a tracing mechanism to discover, is what we're looking at real news or not, right? NodeSphere, which is a system we built to create graph interoperability, letting different kinds of data talk to each other. And our friends at Holochain have been building distributed hash tables, which is kind of like a blockchain, but it's individualized blockchains. So my individual blockchain is different from yours, is different from yours, is different from yours, which preserves individual perception and sovereignty in the field, and allows us to do super fast social exchanges rather than like the way Bitcoin works, which is like massive gargantuan processing just to save, one block into the chain. And then that one block has to be spread to every computer all over the world. It's just extremely wasteful, frankly. Now, of course, it's still better than the current financial system, which means we have to trust banks, and we have to trust, these groups where we know we actually shouldn't have trust, like some of the largest financial systems, companies, and families on the planet. And so, everything's a step here in the right direction. But the way that we're operating now is we're figuring out exactly how to do edge networking peer-to-peer at the level of device. So to the point where it's like me and my devices and my stuff can store locally and communicate with you and your devices and your stuff, which is the way the internet was built to work in the first place. Except that right now, unless you're like a hacker and you have serious skills, it's pretty hard to operate like that, in general, although email actually still behaves like that to some extent. But at this point, we now know that we have to kind of hybridize, where we go direct peer-to-peer, so we create this distributed architecture that's also backed by like a decentralized format where data is sort of cloud stored and backed up for us as a service, so that we can ensure that everything that we create and share is persistent, so people don't lose access to it if we turn off our phone or we turn off our computer. And we figured out the mechanisms now to enable this to happen at such a scale that we believe we can create what we call the last social network, the first fully distributed peer-to-peer social network at a global scale that lets us all take back our identities, take back our network connections with each other, our privacy. And the way that we're doing it as a company is we're building in interfaces that also let you pull data from your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, and et cetera. So you can still see into these other systems and you can still operate with them like a dashboard. So you're not going to just immediately cut everybody off from the existing systems. People wouldn't do it. They wouldn't migrate that way. But our way is to say, well, maybe we can have the best of both worlds. Maybe we can still use the current systems while they're serving us, while transitioning everyone to a user-centric system that will last for, the next 100 years.
Will that get hung up at the search capacity somehow, trying to go P2P, or is that sort of going to be built in? Because that
so there's different ways around it.
Yeah,
there's different ways around it. It makes kind of traditional search a little tougher because you can't just spider everything, right? So you can't graph everything, but every user begins to create their own graphs by bringing their connections to the system. So just think about it like, if I do a Facebook login, for example, that's going to some extent, give me access to saying I have all of these different friends. Now, can I pull data from all of those people? No, not really, but it can say that I have those connections. And then if it says, oh, I have those connections and I have those connections now locally on core network that I can build between me and other users, suddenly now I'm stitching together the graph to be able to find everybody through my own web, my own network, instead of relying on some third party to say, oh, okay, sure, here's your network. We'll serve it to you for a minute. Oh, but if you want to reach all those people, you better pay up because, we're not going to let you actually have that reach because we decide who and where and how, people see the stuff that you post.
It seems like it's kind of inevitably stuck that it's still gonna create, I don't know, like for maybe
the bubbles,
echo chambers, and it's gonna keep that sort of following, because I think the problem I have with a lot of social media is, and not even just social media, like YouTube and search engines and these sorts of things, is they're just sort of, even if they're not trying to completely distort the message and censor, and we know they're doing all that, but even without that, even like back in the good old days when YouTube was still like the Wild West, it's just sort of like the more stuff you put into YouTube, the more it's sort of subtly, sort of just by its algorithm, and this is without even getting into manipulative algorithms. It's just sort of the algorithm's job to make sure that Adam keeps getting stuff that Adam wants. So it's just sort of, I worry that because I mean, Professor Ted talked about it, about just the over socialization. It doesn't matter how you figure out how to set this thing up. It's just fucking too much for us in a couple of 100 years.
Well, yeah, you brought up two of, I think, the most common concerns and considerations that I've gotten over the years. The first one is, how do you deal with the echo chamber problem? Because it gets stronger when you're dealing with trust systems, because who we say we trust now, can directly create a self-validation loop that says, oh, I trust this, so I want to see more of this, and I want to see more of this. The difference is that in current systems, algorithms that try to force feed us content and what we see are outside of our control.
Yeah.
right? So what we're saying is, you're not going to stop reality from existing, right? So in reality, if I trust a friend of mine in physics and I'm looking for a new physics paper, I'm probably going to call my friend that I trust in physics or write to them and ask them, do you know of any new papers that have come out, and trust them to send me some stuff. I'm not going to ask them how to cook a cedar plank salmon, right? Like, I'm going to talk to my chef friend. And that's just the nature of the landscape of trust and reality. And it's one that we rely on every single day, except that generally I actually know who I'm reaching out to. I know they are who they say they are most of the time, because they act with certain patterns and they communicate with certain phrases. There's easy ways for me to determine the validity of this person's identity. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of the information that I look for and get, a lot of my friends post stuff and I don't actually know where it comes from. I can't trace it back to its origin. I can't figure out who shared this, who gave this specific idea, who told people this. And a lot of times when I do really deep research, I find that a lot of it is BS. And I'm like, wow, okay, when I get down to the nuts and bolts, I know this is false. And yet all of these people that I know believe this is true, and they're missing some other piece of information. And so right now, it's a really hardcore game to get down to the roots of truth in different things, because there's so many different perceptions and it's very confusing. So trust helps us kind of clean that up a little bit and start to see where and how to trace and where and how different things emerge and where they come from, and are the identities behind those things valid, and what are the relationships those identities have. And then also being able to turn off the trust echo chamber is important. Echo chamber is important. So if I'm constantly seeing things based on the lens of my trust, I also would like to be able to map and see what I'm not seeing. In other words, what am I not looking at? What am I not noticing? What's in the field that I haven't been looking at, that my friends have been posting, that I haven't been tracking because I haven't been searching through my own lens of trust, or I've been so caught up in searching through my own lens that I can't see it, right? And this brings me to the second big piece, which is how we actually look at our information. Have you ever wondered why you can't get on Facebook and just click like a map button and see where your friends are? Like, have you ever wondered why you can't just like see the local location that people have posted that they're at all over the world? How come I can't do that? How come I can't just even look at my local region and see who lives in Boulder and who lives in Denver and who lives in Longmont? I have to individually search to get a list of each one of those things. And even that's not always that accurate, right? And so we're so blocked in the ability to see our information that we can't understand it. And this is the other big leap that we make in our systems, is that we've created a mechanism that actually lets people look at their information through a variety of different mechanisms, to map their information, to look at it in tiles if they want to, like Pinterest, or look at it like a hex grid, or look at it on a world map, or look at it as star systems in a galaxy and actually go exploring between star systems. Because we believe that how we look at things, it either makes it easier for us to see and understand the information that we're looking at, or not. And so by mapping our graphs and actually by being able to see what it is that we're looking for better and see it through a variety of different mechanisms, we believe we can actually naturally augment consciousness and enable people to understand their networks and their graphs even better.
That makes sense. I mean, in that you're mirroring the natural world in a way too.
That's right.
The unified field and the decentralization of it. Have you thought about incorporating virtual reality into it at all, or?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. That's in from the gates.
Yeah.
And we're building everything to be VR, AR compatible. AR, it's still a little bit of a game of devices catching up to capacity. But our vision is that in the very near future, you'll be able to put on a lightweight pair of glasses sitting at your desk and you'll be able to evoke floating dashboards right in front of you, see everything floating and moving around in front of you, use voice commands, use gesture commands. We've already done some prototyping with this device called Leap Motion, which came out a long time ago, and it's actually they're stopping production of it because they didn't get quite enough support out the gates to keep it going. But this is a great first model of hand gesture control for computing and for virtual things. And the reality is that we've just needed to kind of get to the next stage where we have, clean wearables to make that even more useful, so that you can actually pull up virtual keyboards or virtual objects from a wearable device and now have an easy way to use gestures and voice commands to communicate with that device to get around.
So how are you going to incorporate this with other, like I could see right now there's like Twitter, Facebook, what's the other big one? Like Instagram, let's say, Google, YouTube. I mean, these are sort of, some of them are more platforms, but from a social media perspective, there's all these new platforms coming out right now. They're not all as complex as yours is, in a good way. But there's the Fediverse and the like Mastodon and the Fediverse. Like, how do you? I mean, you're competing with all these new things coming up too. Are you finding a way to connect with them all, or how do we get to the point where we can get to a more unified solution without falling into the monopoly kind of trap?
That's right. Well, there's a reason why we go with this hashtag last social network, and what we mean by that literally is that when users are capable of taking their identity back and operating at a platform level where they have direct peer-to-peer access to their networks and they own their networks, it's now no longer a game of like, people will never again after that say, sure, let me sign over all the rights to my identity and my networks to you again. Like, they'll never want to go back. And so there's really a fleet of projects right now working on this fundamental architecture. And we're by no means trying to say, no, we're going to be the next big thing and you guys can't. We're being a facilitator that says, actually, the future network is the people. The social network is actually our relationships to each other. And what we're going to do is enable people to have and maintain those relationships. And any tool provider or app developer can serve those relationships between people, give them tools, give them things to do. And we're going to facilitate making it so easy and so fun and so sexy to operate at that level by giving people an interface that's amazing and a business model that's amazing that enables them to basically monetize whatever digital products they want. Then now they can make money, they can connect with each other, they can do this, they can see into their existing social networks, and they can access some of these other amazing applications. Now, for those people that may be out there, that are like, yeah, but what about Mastodon? And what about Hilo? And what about gravity networks? And what about all these guys that are already doing it? Well, I love the work that these groups have been doing. They've been actually paving the way towards this future. But none of them have created an open platform layer that's at such an extent that makes everything on top of that platform layer customizable. Mastodon says, yeah, sure, you can host your own network, but that means that you got to have a home server or host it from your own computer, run that network from your own computer, and it's just not accessible to most people to be able to do that. And then the other problem is that, frankly, while I love you guys over there at Mastodon, your interface sucks. Okay. Like it's not good enough. Like, it's not the future. When I get on it, I feel like I'm relegating back from Facebook to the way that it was in the 1990s, or not 1990s, but early 2000s, So like, I feel like I'm jumping back 10 years rather than going forward. And this is a major problem because, especially within the technical space, there's a lot of brilliant developers out there that have worked on amazing things. I mean, just look at all the amazing crypto projects and ICOs that happened in the last few years. But very, very few of them have figured out actually how to create a user interface that people love. So without a good user interface, the only people that can use it are the super geeks who can get on terminal, and do an npm and load some stuff and load a local node and do the whole thing like that. And it's great for people that are developers or hackers, but it's not accessible to the masses. And my grandma certainly is never going to get on that.
Or
right?
the younger people that just like the sexy part of it, or that's what I know you from following some of your work and all. You like to make it very, very visually aesthetically pleasing, and you treat all your websites like that. Like, you go to your website and it's very, very nicely done. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And that's important.
I believe that
think
people
that's important.
won't use things that aren't sexy.
Yeah.
Unless it's so fundamentally functional that it doesn't matter, something like Craigslist. But even on Craigslist, like, have you ever gone through a search on Craigslist and ever just got a headache from the fact that you're just looking at blue links and black text for days and days and days? I mean, it's like, isn't there something else you can give us visually to help recognize what we're looking at a little faster? And even just, with something like Craigslist, you can see the power of mapping, right? So like, they implement mapping in the like housing market, for example. And just by doing that, it leaped Craigslist forward in its ability to be a tool for housing. And yet still, so many more people tend to use Zillow. Why? Because Zillow has a sexy interface. It's easy. It looks good. It's pictures first. The map is really easy to draw your area that you want to search in. You get a bunch of color-coded dots, and it's easy to jump into the areas you're looking at and find what you're looking for. Interface is everything. And it makes the difference between an app or a product that succeeds now and a product that fails. So for us, interface is the biggest deal in town. And we believe that what we're creating is going to be the style of interface and the approach to interface that's actually going to be the most exciting and popular approach that will be used over the next century. And I think we're literally going to leap forward interface 10 years into the future.
Wow, that's exciting. Yeah. And the encryption part too, right? The irrational number encryption.
Yes, exactly.
And will that be in some sort of open source framework?
So we have open source layers of our technology in Superluminal, and those open source layers include, Trust Graph, NodeSphere, the work with Holochain and our partners over there is open source. There's open source components of Threefold Network, who are some of our partners for distributed hosting or decentralized hosting. On the encryption side, the company that I've worked with over the past couple of years building that is called Crown Sterling. And boy, when we first came out with a few of our ideas showing that there's problems with the existing encryption world, we got major flack. Like, the guys at RSA freaked out. They literally went through this massive campaign trying to attack us after our presentation at Black Hat, where the CEO, Robert, presented. He literally did a short talk on a couple of the vulnerabilities of existing prime encryption. And these guys had already done an interview with Vice magazine before the talk, saying that we were a bunch of liars that were going to be trying to hoodwink everybody, and that it was like all a scam. And then, like, the guys had guys planted in the audience. They waited until the very end of the talk, which went perfectly well. Everybody enjoyed the talk. There was great questions. And then at the very end, these guys get up and they're like, "You guys are scam artists. This is a bunch of BS." And then the next thing we know, literally that night, there's an article about scam artists at Black Hat and this whole thing. And Black Hat took down our talk, which was against the agreements that we had with Black Hat, which then Crown Sterling had to sue Black Hat, which they won, by the way. And just to get it to be like publicly open again, because these articles and everything else literally were lying, saying people were booing through this whole presentation, which never happened, and like the stuff that we were doing, and have been doing is so serious on the level of encryption. We had 14 guys from the Department of Defense register to come to our private event at Black Hat. Now, these military guys wouldn't have taken this seriously if it was a bunch of BS, you know? And since then, literally, we've gone about building this whole new encryption system. Every partner, every company that we've been working with, and we've got some huge mainstream names on the docket. And I can't unfortunately say them because there's agreements and stuff, but we've got some major mainstream, OEM contracts. We've got some, huge partners that have come to the table. Groups like Sarson Funds sent over a group of mathematicians because they wanted to research this for their investors. Their mathematicians were like, oh my God, this is absolutely the next big thing. And I can't believe that we've still been going along with this idea that our current encryption is going to keep lasting into the new world, because everybody already knows that quantum computers are going to screw prime-based encryption and RSA. Everybody knows that. And it's going to screw up things like elliptical curve and stuff like that too. So we built a modified elliptical curve, ECDH. We built a new random number generation system, and all of it uses irrational numbers. And frankly, it's just better. It's smarter. It's more uncrackable. And with the new one-time pad, it's literally the first quantum proof encryption that's going to go out and be available widely on the market.
Wow, that's fantastic. So how do people go? Yeah. Do they go to that Crown Sterling to find out more then about this?
That's right. Yeah, you can go to crownsterling.io and there's information there. Yeah. If you register for the portal and sign on, there's an NDA on there, but if you sign that and you go in, there's white papers that, unpack all of the math and the encryption and the way it works. We've seen a few, let's just say, probably not good parties that have been coming in trying to try to find something wrong or trying to find a way to poke at us. But we haven't seen anything published yet because the math speaks for itself. And these guys went so far as to create fake GitHub accounts. They created a fake Twitter account. They did everything they could to try to basically debase and disenfranchise, and say these guys are scam artists. This is all BS. But I promise you, man, once people actually understand the new math and they understand the work that we've been doing, it's going to be huge. And the token that's coming out right now to sell this new encryption, it's going to be absolutely massive. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. Yeah,
right on. Well, we'll look forward to that. Before we let you go, I mean, it's flown by. I love the way you describe things. It just really makes it easy for me to understand. You just put it Thanks, right man. Down to our level. Can we talk about the pyramid news before you go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just had mentioned briefly that some new papers have shown up from Isaac Newton, where he was actually researching and studying different things like the proportions and dynamics and different occult ideas encrypted and hidden into the pyramids. And if you haven't seen the work of Alan Green, he's also absolutely amazing, great performer, would be a great guy to have on the show. Alan Green has spent his life fundamentally proving that William Shakespeare is not just some random guy, that it's actually a team of guys who are high-level Rosicrucians who literally were occultists encrypting sacred knowledge into the work of Shakespeare. And these guys were so good that into Shakespeare's sonnets, the cover of the sonnets, just on the front with a couple lines and a few dots, they encoded a whole series of mathematical constants, even some that we didn't even know existed at the time. And that the entire structure also points to the exact positioning of the pyramid in Giza, where it is longitude and latitude. And the entire structure of the sonnets is literally built like the stones of the pyramid, forming the structure of the pyramid and all its sides, its angles. It's massively encrypted work. And the level of encryption is just absolutely brilliant. And so there's a lot more than meets the eye to the Great Pyramid, and the great, occultists of the ages, including Isaac Newton, who's thought of as a physicist, but the guy was really an alchemist, have done huge amounts of work to share and store, some of this sacred information over the centuries.
When was he around again? Was it the 16 or 1700s? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, Newton is 1620,
something like that. Yeah, so a little bit after like John Dee and those guys that Alan Green talks about, and Bacon.
Yeah, 1643 was when he was born. So a little after Dee,
right.
and Dee and the team, Edward de Vere, Edward Kelly. Francis Bacon would have taken up the torch after John Dee and Edward de Vere did. But Alan Green's work is just absolutely mind blowing, and he's proven that every mathematical constant known to man is encrypted in the Great Pyramid, and that is just unbelievably amazing.
Yeah, it blows me away. We had Alan on a couple times. Once, quite a few years ago, and then again, a little bit more recent when he had more information about that sonnet and all that, and we did a visual, sort of more of a visual presentation. And it blows me away that he's connected with all you guys too, and that you share each other's work. It's just fantastic.
I was just texting with Alan like last week.
Oh wow, yeah.
Nice.
He's gonna come back on the show. I mean, did that episode 209 we did where we first like started getting into all that Shakespeare stuff was like still to this day one of our most popular episodes. People are constantly. It's just the way he delivers it too. It's just like a fucking mystery novel. It's fucking fantastic. I was like, I just wanted to go right into that church or museum and bust that shit up and find out for myself.
I know, right?
And we did the video one with them too. I can't remember what number. People have to look it up. But he was laying out the cover of the sonnets for us. He had that on the screen, and it's unbelievable. Wow. And he's just a fucking fantastic guy to chat with too. He's fun, and you've been fantastic too.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
we appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
Dan.
And when you blow up, don't forget about your buddies over at Grimerica. We'll have you back on. When all those other people are vying for your attention, don't forget about us.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great, man. Thanks a lot for your time and effort and energy.
Yeah.
It's been
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it, and love your work. And thank you guys for bringing us on and doing this work of spreading good information to people, and lots of hope and good cheer, because it is the season, right? And it's time for us to really connect and to focus on what matters.
Right on, buddy. Right on. Thanks.
Have a good night, Adam.
All right. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Have a great evening.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
And that was a chat. Adam Apollo.
Ooh. Oh, dude, I don't know. I was picking up what he was putting down. I don't know if it's the way these Resonance Foundation guys explain stuff, but man, I'm just getting it. I'm visualizing it. It's clicking.
It's finally clicking. Six years later.
It's like 7.5, 8 years later.
Well, we didn't really get into the unified field theory stuff until like year 2 or 3. Though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I mean, the thing is it's scary with this technology stuff because we're on the brink right now. Actually, that was what he wanted to title we're on the brink of this.
That's what I did title.
Of this, technocratic takeover, and some of the stuff that he's talking about is a big component of this. I mean, we just got locked down tonight, and we're supposed to stay home and work from home and be on all these platforms. And I mean, the thing I like about it, because normally that would kind of scare me, is what he's talking about. But he explains it in a way that makes it resonate with the way the universe is, like the stuff that what's his name from Thrive was on talking about.
Foster
Gamble, because Thrive explained it too. The way it's in tune and it's kind of mimicking the universe. It's not like forcing it down your throat, or it's not that. It's like the decentralized aspect of what he's talking about, and the humanistic aspect of it seems to make sense. It takes away that technocratic fear that I have right now.
At least it tries.
At least from that aspect. I mean, then I'll go back on Instagram and be.
That'll be it. Fucking freaking the fuck out.
I mean, I'm not even on Facebook and Twitter, so I can't even imagine.
I'm not
because
on
I get
I just have a Facebook page. We have the Facebook page, so it's great. It's just like a fucking wall.
Just a
with
repository.
You
don't even.
I don't even, dude. Sometimes I go fucking a while without even looking at the. I don't even care anymore.
No.
I posted a tweet. I was like, just an at doesn't mean much anymore. There's too much. I can't keep up with it. Stop.
You posted a tweet on Facebook? Is that what you're saying?
No, on Twitter. I put a tweet. Saying,
Oh, you tweeted.
So
you not posted a tweet. You actually tweeted.
Well, whatever. I posted a tweet. Tweeting is the act of posting a tweet. That's right.
Yeah.
So I posted a tweet.
Yeah.
I just can't. Like, you can't.
And how'd it go? Did it?
Oh, I don't know.
What would you say? What did you say?
I just said I can't keep up. Sorry.
That's what you posted?
Yeah.
Oh my God! You just posted that you can't keep up.
Dude,
did you say Facebook? Did your meme get? Did your meme get? Did your meme get?
It was a little aggressive.
Was it that aggressive? Did it get canceled? Did it get deleted? Did you get canceled?
I didn't get. I don't know. I got to check. I couldn't find it. All the other stuff I posted was fine, but it was a little like.
We are shadow banned. I mean, we're getting throttled, like you said. I mean, you can pay Facebook to get more followers or Instagram to get more followers, so you can see more ads and all that. And
it was a little more risque than the stuff I normally post. It was like
we don't have to talk about it now.
Well, anyway, big thanks to Adam for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. We need you guys to support the show. Coming up in the end of the year, it's super important. 2020 has been a tough year. Let's go into 2021 with your karma and you're feeling good because you're supporting the Grimerica show and you're helping us move in the right direction and all that great stuff. Let's go to grimerica.ca/support. If you can, when you can, sign up for a monthly, make a one-time donation. Head over to grimerica.ca/swag. You can buy all sorts of stuff over there, masks, shirts, stickers. I mean, just about anything. Leggings, scarves.
Toques? No toques?
No toques yet.
Okay.
We're working on it.
Okay.
One day we'll have toques. Okay. I don't know what day.
I can't believe we're Canadians in Alberta. It's locked down in the winter and we don't have toques.
It's not going to be 2020. It might be, maybe with a little luck, 2021 we'll get some toques going. Or beanies.
Can we put some runes on it? Like, can we have rune toques? Grimerica. What's Grimerica in runes? We should figure that out. Or can you, do they work like that?
I don't fucking know.
Okay, I'll figure it out.
Anyway, we love you guys. Support the show. Do all the stuff in the show notes. Be kind to each other. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.
And thanks for watching live.
So the meme was like, it's this, I forget, it's like this person praying up.
Thanks, Jaybird.
It's this,
go ahead.
This person's praying up to heaven, I guess. And how many people will have to die of COVID-19 before you
lose your freedom? Before you
give
regain
up your rights.
Oh, before you give up your rights.
And then the angel like flies down and gives her a little note, flies away, and she opens up the note and it says, all of them. I just couldn't stop laughing. Anyway, buy some Grimerica swag. That's all right. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning out. Third Eye in the Sky did not like the show.
Also, he believes in Corona too much. He can do news without conspiracy. You can't do news without conspiracy. Who believes in Corona too much?
I don't know. I don't know what you're reading.
I'm reading the top of the notes there, the top of the chats.
Oh, you don't want to get into reading the YouTube chats. Oh, Jimmy Dore. I think they're bitching about Jimmy Dore.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
You can't get into reading the YouTube chats.
Okay, yeah.
If we could do lighters and bongs and pipes. So here's the thing. You just buy the stickers and then you stick them on the bongs and the lighters and the pipes. Best I got.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for the show. So boring on PooTube these days. Oh, I thought he said.
Oh yeah, YouTube is just terrible, dude. Oh my God, I can't. I got to get off it. I'm trying other platforms. Personally.
I'm off.
I know. Good. You're good. Actually, how come JRE's still on YouTube? I thought it was all taken off. But
I can't. My biggest problem right now is I can't get by the training in my Xbox game to play with my friends.
Training in your Xbox game.
You have to get past the training before you can play with me, because like I picked up that Xbox and a couple of my friends want to play with me.
Oh, you're trying to play online with friends?
I predicted that it was going to be a rough winter. So I was like, you know what? And the new Xbox came out and everyone's freaking out over it. And like you go on Kijiji, there's like 1,000 of the old Xbox, which is still perfectly good.
Yeah.
For like super cheap, like $100 Canadian. And then you pay like a couple bucks a month, and it comes with like a bunch of games, 150 games or something. So it's a good investment for the kids when they're not going to be able to do.
And you're trying to play games online with friends.
So my buddies play this game called Warzone or something, like Plumber and John and some of the guys in the shop, and they want to play, but you got to pass the training to play online, and I just
can't pass the training.
I just can't stay focused long enough. Honestly, I can't spend more than 10 minutes on that thing.
Yeah.
The only game I've been able to really get into so far is Worms, which was before the Nintendo. And then Cassandra plays this game Unraveled where you're two little dolls tied together and you like swing around and try and solve little puzzles.
Cool.
I got really into that game. All the other like games, I get killed too fast and I can't. I got to find a game. I need people to message me the games that they think I might be able to get into. I mean, you people should know me pretty good by now. You listen to hundreds and hundreds of me fucking yapping. You should be able to gauge what games I'll like and send them to me.
All right. Thanks for watching live. We'll be back in 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
With Freedom for Canada.
Is it Tuesday?